Welcome to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito from Private Vista. In this podcast, we draw from years of experience as well as guest specialists to help you create the life you imagine. Join us in this journey as we enlighten and empower you to align your lifestyle to help you achieve your goals with a clear picture of your future. Now, let's get to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Dollars and Cents podcast with your host, Nicole Romito. Nicole, it is a beautiful, beautiful day where I am, and I can't think of a person I'd rather spend it with than you. So welcome to my day. Good to see you again.
That's so nice. Thank you, Bill. It is good to be back with you in studio. So always look forward to our time together.
I do as well, and I'm sure the listeners do. And I'm sure foremost on their mind right now is what in the world is Nicole going to talk about in this episode?
Yeah, I agree. And I hope that is what's top of mind for our listeners. We are going to have a conversation that is on a more serious note. Today, we're going to talk about how to prepare for the death of a loved one. So it's not something I think anyone wants to talk about, but having been doing planning for, many, many years now, it really is almost even more important to have all your ducks in a row for this type of situation than it is, for thinking like, oh, when will I be financially independent? Or, all the stars kind of lining up.
Yeah. Nobody wants to talk about this, Nicole, because they feel like if they talk about it, it's going to make it happen.
Right. So. Yeah, that is true. Right. That I don't want to put it out in the universe because then it's going to come to me. But there's few things in life that you say, I know can happen, but this is something that is going to happen. Most people don't know when or how, but it is out there. And so to that end, I have one of my esteemed colleagues in studio with me. I'd like to welcome back Carrie Shoener.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Absolutely. And for our longtime listeners, they may say, wait a minute, what happened to Carrie Mangan? So
yes, I got married. So now Carrie Shoener.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name.
All good. It's still new.
I'm still getting used to it. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. So just as a refresh, Carrie's been with Private Vista since the fall of 2021. Prior to joining our team, she worked at a similar financial planning firm in the Chicagoland area. She was there for a few years. And then before she started her career in financial planning, she was a teacher through Teach for America in Gary, Indiana, and Philadelphia. Certainly, I know having worked with you for the past few years, you've really been able to transfer a lot of your skills that you learned as a teacher, I think both in teaching us, and then also I know I've seen you live in action with our clients.
I always joke that this job now is really like parent-teacher conferences for adults. So
there you go. I love it. So in addition to teaching, Carrie also enjoyed being a student. She has completed her master's in finance from the University of Notre Dame. And then right after that, she jumped in to earn her CFP, which is the Certified Financial Planning designation. So I think you're done with school for a while, right?
Hopefully forever.
Right, exactly. So, and then on a personal side, Carrie lives in the River West neighborhood in Chicago. As we mentioned, she was recently married. So she lives there with her fabulous husband, Will, and their adorable fur baby, Tito. Anything else you want to share about what you guys like to do?
I think you covered it. The only other thing top of mind for me is that I'm a huge reader. So always reading, always trying to learn.
Yes. I think that my guess is probably a lot of what you're going to share today, you probably have learned through reading, and that'll probably be a good resource, I would think, whether it's maybe where to search for information or where not to. And then I'm not putting you on the spot, but I don't know if you have any like blogs or podcasts or books you recommend. And it's okay if you don't. So
yeah, I don't know that I do, but I'll think on it and we can always add them to the episode notes.
Exactly, guys. And we can always put them in the show notes. So with that, for our listeners, I know the first thing Carrie and I wanted to just kind of to set the tone for today's episode is clearly this is going to be an emotional topic. If you're thinking of, even if everyone's in good health and you're just like, hey, we want to have these discussions now while everyone is in a good state of mind, while everyone's here, so we can sit down face to face, whether it's with kids or parents or whoever's going to be part of the conversation, we understand it's going to be emotional, and it's probably going to bring up, I think every family, however you define family, has those like taboo topics or the skeleton in the closet or things like that. So we want to kind of acknowledge we get that. And it could, stir up some negative emotions or things you don't want to talk about.
Definitely. I think that there are a couple things in life that really bring out family quirks or dynamics that rise to the surface in moments of either happy times or more stressful conversations. And
right.
This is definitely one that, even if you're not going through it right now, it's a tough experience in anyone's life. So that's definitely at play here, and we recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this could also come in, someone could have recently received a terminal diagnosis or, got diagnosed with an illness where it's not going to be something you're working to cure. All of us every day, we get a day older.
We're always aging.
We're always aging. And then, you may be going through it with your parents. I think my listeners know my mom passed away. We're just coming up on the anniversary. My dad, luckily, is still with us, but he's 85. He's a young 85, but still. And then also, too, just with situations where we've had it maybe with friends or, God forbid, neither of us have kids, but I would say I don't think either of us could think of anything more horrible.
Definitely.
Than that.
Yeah.
So why don't we kind of, now that we set the stage, either you just got the diagnosis, so you're like, okay, this is moving up my priority list, or you're just like, I'd rather just get this out of the way and I don't want to burden anyone.
Totally.
So
I think a lot of it comes from wanting to make sure that loved ones understand your intentions, that everybody's on the same page, and that no one's put in a stressful situation where they have to make decisions without really understanding what the person who's going through it would have wanted. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But for our listeners, Carrie and I have these conversations with clients.
Yeah.
Very often. I'm working with, I can think of 3 clients where the spouse has died over the past year. And one was completely unexpected. One, unfortunately, there was cancer, but it's yes, we can talk about the dollars and cents of it. And that's a piece of it. It's an important piece.
Definitely.
But it's also too helping people just kind of, I think we've both seen, if you don't have the conversations ahead of time, it can really leave the other person or people who are trying to figure out, like, what would she have wanted? I don't know what mom and dad, we never talked about this stuff in our family. So what is the right thing to do to honor them?
Yeah. And even just how to manage the logistics if you're not aware of what's at play. So I think it definitely is an example of why it's really important in any household to have more than one person that has this kind of knowledge or that knows where the keys are, so to say.
Exactly.
So that you can act if something were to happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's kind of knowing where all the things are. And then I think too, we did want to just acknowledge before we go into that a little more is, sadly, we have limited time today. So we could probably spend a full day going into this with a really deep dive. So I know you kind of put together your like key points or top things to consider if you're at a point where you're like, yeah, we need to move this up the priority list.
Definitely. There's so much we could talk about to prep for this. I know you and I could just talk forever. But
yes, well, that's just in general.
Yeah, that's just our personality.
Yeah.
But our goal for this episode is really just to provide a couple of main tips if this is something that you're navigating or that you'll navigate in the future.
So why don't we start off? You mentioned, and I love the phrase, like the keys to the house. So can you maybe go in a little deeper dive, share with our listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think there are 2 different ways to think about this. One of them being just like where everything is located. So what are the pieces that you need to have the information about in order to figure out what's next? So logistically, right? Like bank accounts, investment accounts, all of those like logistics of your financial life. And then on maybe the softer side, thinking about making your desires known. So whether that is thinking about big decisions like cremation or being buried, thinking about end of life care, if you have children who would be guardians for minor children, all of those decisions that are a bit emotional and might take some time and intentional conversations with the other loved ones in your household, and then also with an estate planner, thinking about those things so that you can have them prepared in a way that is easy for people to execute if something were to happen.
Yes. And I'd like to add on, we've seen it. Usually the way these situations work out the best is, and even if your kids are adults and have their own children, if you can have the conversation where everyone can come around the proverbial table, I understand it might be a Zoom, if you will, but and you can share, like you said, here's what we're thinking, or here's why we did this. And you don't necessarily have to put numerical or financial values if you don't want to share like your net worth or the finances, but you could still either outline like we are directing certain accounts to certain people, or if you're charitably inclined. Oftentimes we see, especially when your kids are adults, not every kid ends up in the same financial situation.
Totally.
Right? Or with the same degree of responsibility.
Yeah.
So
skill sets vary widely among
that's a great way to put
it. So thinking about who would maybe be in charge of one thing versus another, it could be totally different people, and making that decision out loud for people to understand.
Yeah. Some of them are obvious, right? If one adult kid is a doctor or a nurse,
for sure,
and the other two are in finance or software development or whatever, like all the kids might be like, clearly, Dr. Carrie should be the one, deciding on the health things.
For sure.
So sometimes it's straightforward like that, but oftentimes it's not.
Yeah.
Where do the kids live? Are two of your children like in the throes of raising their own children and they're working full time?
Yeah.
Maybe your other child, either their kids are launched or they don't have kids or things like that. So it's all about, like you said, skill set, but then also capacity.
Definitely.
Okay. So anything else you want to add on that when you're kind of putting together over who's going to be responsible for different things, or even how, what you want to convey of why you've made decisions? Or
I think the only other thing that we haven't touched on would be, we talked about capacity in terms of like what is going on in your life, but emotional capacity as well. You might find that one of your adult children might be able to make more level-headed decisions in moments of stress or emotion, while you know point. That another person might have a harder time with that, or might be more focused on other elements of grieving or coping with whatever's going on.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, too, sometimes the players, if you will, or the people involved, they know that, but oftentimes they don't.
Yeah.
And I know, I've been doing this for many years now, and you can kind of tell either if you've met kids, whether it's clients or friends, and you look at the sibling relationship, you're like, whoa, this is like barely hanging on by a thread. And
totally.
Mom and dad are both alive.
Yeah.
They'll say like, oh, once mom goes, like the wheels are going to fall off this. Like we're all just keeping it together for her benefit. I do think a lot of times we've heard responses from clients of, I'm going to be dead. I'm not going to see this happen, or, let the chips fall where they may. We've also had them seen like, well, we know who's going to struggle with this the most, or we think this person is going to need more financially just because of the career path they've chosen, or maybe they've had some challenges in life. So again, if you think about it, the documents, so your estate planning documents, that's great, right? It's all in writing. You've had an attorney draft it, but those are in legalese. And the attorney isn't going to be able to answer the question, most likely, of why did the second parent to die, why did they choose Carrie and not me?
Totally.
Or, mom knew I wanted grandma's engagement ring, right?
Yeah.
And I agree, right? You're not going to be here, so you're not going to see it. Totally true. And again, Carrie and I are not coming from a place of one choice is right or wrong,
not
or good or bad. No judgment-free zone here. I think a big part of the role we play is helping clients think through. Have you considered this? let's play this out. If you
Yeah.
do it this way, and from what you've told me about the dynamics, how could this go? And just even kind of walking them through, oftentimes they're like, that doesn't feel very good. Or, oh, I could see where now Carrie might not end up talking to her brother ever again.
Exactly.
Right?
I think a lot of people just really want to avoid the event of their passing causing further drama or anguish, whether it's the children or spouse, siblings, whoever is really taking care of that, wanting to make sure that if they understand it, then any kind of tension between the players can be alleviated up front.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's good kind of on that, is having the conversations. So if we're looking at, like you said, talking to the people, what about though, if we want to talk about how do you communicate kind of what they need to know, right? Like from the logistics side.
Definitely. So I think a big piece of this would be making sure that your estate planning documents are updated and strong and that you've written them with a good attorney. We don't draft documents here, but we provide a lot of education to our clients on this topic. One of the most impactful things we can do is to outline each account or each asset they have and give a little overview of how that asset would pass in the event of their death. Some things might go directly to a beneficiary or a trust, while other things might need to go through probate. And to understand that up front helps people to either reorganize things or give the stamp of approval that it's set up the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other part of this is having the values down is good to know. I know that you and I have worked on a situation together where the client intends to give a certain value to the kids from a trust account at their passing, but that trust doesn't even have that value in there.
Exactly.
Thinking about your intentions and saying, okay, if you want this to go to these people or this organization, is there enough to fund your goal in that asset? That's important to outline too. And I think that's kind of easy to miss if you're not looking at the values.
It is. Well, I think that's a really excellent point. So I do want to just kind of summarize that or emphasize it as a better word for our listeners, because you can have the best estate planning attorney and he or she, the documents do what you want. They say what you want and they're going to carry out your wishes. But oftentimes you're exactly right. They don't really put together the flow chart with the types of assets. How do they pass? How much is going outright? How much is going to the trust? And then showing values of when the kids or the beneficiaries would have access to it. So to your point, like we had that situation where the trust, there wasn't enough assets going to it to fulfill their wishes. I've had another situation where the client owns a privately held business. He's the sole owner. Only one adult child is involved in the business. And then his siblings are not involved in the business by their choice.
Yeah. But
when they said, I want, everything to go equally to the kids, a couple questions came up. Well, what other assets are there? The business is the most valuable asset.
Yeah.
Do you want the 5 siblings who weren't running the business? Now, all of a sudden, the one child has siblings as partners.
Yeah.
And they have no interest or no knowledge of running it. How does he have the capability to buy them out? Right. So there's things where you look on paper and that makes sense. That seems equitable to me. But depending on the type of assets and their corresponding values, it may not be possible or it may not be very easy.
That's a really good example with the business. I think if you don't consider that kind of nuance, it could be really complicated.
Right.
And overwhelming for the business owner left behind, who now has to figure out whether they can buy out the siblings or how they run a business together.
Yeah, exactly. And most likely, especially with like a business, but any type, there's things didn't go as planned or things didn't go how the beneficiaries thought they were going to go. A lot of time and money is going to be spent. We're going to bring in attorneys and things like that to figure this out.
For sure.
So I think that's a really big value add that at least I know we add to it is we do review the documents. As Carrie noted, we are not attorneys. We don't draft or things like that. But because we all have our CFP designations, we do know enough to know where there's potential vulnerabilities or opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll then also do a flow chart to say, hey, here's how your estate's going to flow today based on the values and how you have things set up.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people like to revisit that too throughout time to, make sure that as your situation evolves, as your life is changing, that it still reflects your current intentions.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times the first time people do estate planning documents is when they have a child, because you need to name guardians.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times they'll be like, oh my God, we haven't even looked at our documents since, our first child was born and now they're 35.
Yeah. So obviously things have changed.
Yes, yes.
Hey, pardon the interruption. I know you are listening to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, and we're happy you're here. If you have any questions, please head over to myprivatevista.com or the show notes to find out how to reach us. We'd love to hear from you.
Also, not only does your personal situation change, but we certainly know the tax laws change.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That, and 35 years, your net worth has changed a lot as well.
Yeah.
So where you might have been like, oh, we were just really worried about who was going to take care of little Johnny and, whatever, we'll put the beneficiaries on our 401ks at that point. You could have really evolved from there.
Yeah. Things start out simple and they almost always get more complex.
Exactly.
The other estate planning document that can be important is just your health directive.
Okay.
So making it clear to your agent what kind of life-sustaining measures, if any, you would want to be taken. I think that's the other piece here that's important to point out is that when you've got that drafted up and when everybody in your life understands what those wishes are,
right,
then it takes a lot of anguish out of that process or that moment for those people.
Yeah. Also takes the pressure off of them.
Definitely.
They may not like your decision, but at least they know this is what he or she told me.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Right. That's a really good point. What about, so we've talked about some estate planning documents. What are some other documents? Let's talk about so much of our life is digital these days,
oh
right?
My gosh, yes.
And I know you and I are always like, what passwords? Like, can they just scan my fingertip or my eyeball? Because
I wish.
Right? Everyone has their own formulas or format that your password needs to be. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So we recommend having all of this information in one place so that the key players after your passing are able to access what they need to access. And I think this can look a lot of different ways depending on your situation.
Okay.
So some people might prefer to do like an Excel spreadsheet or to have it on a folder in your computer, while other people might prefer like a physical binder that has your account names, your account numbers, links to the websites you would go to log in, the credentials. And then also in that should be information on all of your professionals. So your accountant, your attorney, financial advisor, if you've got trustees or executors set up, outlining all of that in the same place can be super helpful to make sure that things are clear and that people aren't left trying to guess what you would leave as your password.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because, with certain, and I know one thing we wanted to highlight is if you have, and hopefully you do, have a password on your phone that, I think Apple, is it 10,
Yes.
10 times? Like you can only do a certain number of guesses and then it's locked.
Yep. And I know Apple now too, they have a feature called like the legacy contact.
Oh, tell me more.
So my mom actually set this up and I found out one day by getting a text that says you are now your mom's legacy contact. So
did she tell your siblings this?
They might find out live on this podcast. We'll see if they listen. But really what it is it gives someone access to get into all of your apps or, your information in the event that something happened. So I think that's a pretty cool feature.
I agree. And that's called the Apple Legacy Contact?
Yep. The Apple Legacy Contact. So it's pretty cool.
I'm making a note now, listeners. I'm going to do this as soon as Carrie and I are done with our podcast episode.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's good. Love the idea of, like you said, if it's virtual or a physical in real life binder or whatnot. The key thing I just want to add on to your comments is, passwords either change because sometimes like on the financial sites, they'll make you change them. Or I don't know about you, Carrie, but half the time I'm like, oh, this seemed to make sense at the time I selected this password, but my typical 3 current ones that are in rotation aren't working. So you have to reset it.
Yep.
So how often do you recommend updating, whether you're doing a spreadsheet or printing something out?
I mean, obviously, best case scenario would be that every time you update a password, you do this. But
okay, but let's talk reality.
Yes, but I know that's not reality. So I would say that maybe every 6 months you sit down and revisit this and make sure that everything's up to date. That would be probably my recommendation, just so that it's not overwhelming like so often, but that you capture any changes that are made.
Yeah. Also, too, I know we've talked about like financial assets, if you will, but you also want to make sure if you have a safe deposit box, that you have added someone else to have access to it.
Definitely.
That's probably not if you're married or in a committed relationship, probably someone in addition
to that person. For sure.
So I think that's a key one. Also, too, depending on like how much cash you sit on at the bank. If a savings account and you're carrying a decent amount of balance, and decent is subjective, I realize, listeners, but you'd probably want to have that titled to your trust.
Yeah.
But checking account, you probably don't want to sit a lot of cash anyways, because you don't earn anything. But you would either want to, again, if you're have someone you trust, whether it's a spouse, a partner, an adult child, your sister, anyone who you trust, you could add them on as a joint owner. Or I think a lot of banks will still allow you to have like someone who could have a signature.
Trusted contact.
Yeah. Or like someone who could have access to it to access funds as well.
Definitely.
So I think that's a key one, because one of the things is, I know we're saying we're planning is, but in the event someone does die, you're going to have to let the bank know at some time, but we don't recommend that's your first call, because if no one else is on the account, they're going to freeze those assets. And then you may have inadvertently caused yourself a liquidity crunch. And you're like, holy cow, I can't even pay the bills to keep the house lights on. And I'm trying to do last arrangements and things like that.
For sure. I think that's really important. And the other thing I was going to say on passwords and all of that is that if you're someone who does prefer a binder, make sure that whoever would be getting that knows where that is in your house.
Oh, that's a great point.
So to the safety deposit box point, all of this is great, but if they don't know where the Excel spreadsheet or the binder or wherever that is lives, then it's almost as if you didn't even do it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And they're probably not, that's probably not top of mind of what they're thinking of once they've learned of the loved one passing.
Definitely.
So, okay. So we've talked about that. Now, you did just mention, we've been kind of focusing on a family member, not only a spouse or a partner, but we've talked about kids. It could go the other way. If you're the adult kid, you want to make sure you probably know for your parents.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be a blood relative.
No. Yeah. I think everyone's situation is unique, and you might choose someone who's been your best friend for life, or that, you have a close relationship with and you trust and is going to be a good person to execute your wishes. I think a lot of people default to the idea that this would be a spouse doing this. And, we work with such a broad range of clients. We've seen every situation.
Right.
And there really is no normal. And in that way, there's also no abnormal. So whoever you think is best is who you should go with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as you're I mean, I know even for me, I think our listeners know I'm not married. I don't have kids. My dad and sister live out of state. My sister would not want to, or even in her own words, would not be able to deal with this. And my dad's 85. So I've looked at, for my financial side, this won't be a surprise. I got 2 of my partners, my younger partners, who they already know all my finance stuff.
Yeah.
So they're going to be really familiar with, they have access to all the systems, right? And things like that. So I did that. And then on the powers of attorney for the healthcare directive, just as you said, I have two friends. Now, they both happen to be attorneys, which did weigh into me choosing them, but they also know me really well.
Yeah.
So they're going to be able to, they're going to, of course, be sad that I'm deteriorating, right?
Course.
But, they're going to still be able to be level-headed and make good decisions on my healthcare side. So,
and sometimes just because you have that like familial relationship with someone doesn't mean that they would necessarily, like you said, have interest in doing this, be able to deal with it, or that they would have the skill set needed to make these types of choices.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say, to your point, like, I let my dad know, because it was him and then it was my sister.
Yep.
And, he was like, all right, I guess I get it. And I'm like, Dad, it's nothing against you. I'm like, A, you live out of state, and B, and he's like, oh, I know. And then I told my sister and she's like, great.
Yes, she was like, best news ever.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, what about, so we've talked a little bit about, I think your kind of key points are, have the conversation now while you can.
Yep.
People hear it live from your mouth. We've talked about documents. We've talked about picking your people, notifying them of where the documents are, where the binder is or the folder on the computer, having having even the passwords or pins to access the computer or the device, I guess, is a better thing.
So true.
And then we just talked about who needs to know it, who can be the who, if you will. What else did you want to share with our listeners?
I think that about sums it up. The only other thing I would say is we didn't talk a ton about planning for your end of life conversation or celebration in this, whole discussion.
Okay.
And we've got a great episode that actually kind of goes over that more in depth. So it's episode 19 with Alexandra Coys. So definitely check that out, because I think that's a nice extension of the conversation that we're having today. And another consideration that people think about when they're having these kinds of discussions with their loved ones.
Yeah, because I think, like so many things in the world, how people want to be, there's so many different choices now than just the traditional viewing or wake and then the funeral and things like that.
Definitely.
So again, no right or wrong, but sometimes, it's not something you usually talk about. And so some people might not know, like, when I updated my documents, I'm like, I want you guys to throw a heck of a party.
Heck yeah.
And, and Randy's in charge of that. So stay close to him.
You've got a good party planner ready to go.
I do watch my back when I'm around him now, but I gave him an unlimited budget. And I'm like, I just want everyone to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Share the funny stories or your favorite memory.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a key thing. So awesome. Well, as always, thank you for sharing your time and what I know is a small slice of your knowledge with our listeners. I appreciate you coming back in the studio.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I always love doing this.
And as you know, because you've been on before, I always ask all my guests, if you could live anywhere in the world, no time constraints, no money constraints, I know you're super close with your family. Where would you want to live and why?
I think my money is no object scenario would be having just a small condo in every city that I love.
Oh,
so that it would just be easy to bop back and forth between lots of different places.
Love it.
So I think that would be Chicago, Nashville. We've got my in-laws are in New York City, but then internationally, I would love to have a place to bop over to London, Paris. I think all of those places would just be so nice to have a little getaway.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you title them all to your trust.
I will.
Otherwise, that's going to be a heck of a probate project.
Yeah, right. International probate does not sound fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
I like that idea. I like the idea of a little condo in all the cities that you like. I'm down with that. That's what I'm very much down. That's great. I have a quick question, though, because it was alluded to, death equals drama, especially in families. And I know that there are some people who feel like they need to treat all of their children, equitably. There are some people who think, well, no, this child is doing something a little different and is going to need a little help. You alluded to this, but how do families have this conversation? I mean, is this something that you all facilitate, that you sit down with folks and say, listen, we've got this worked out. We can help you talk to your family now and let them know what you're planning and what your plans are.
Definitely. Yeah. I've been in, several conversations with clients and their adult children, kind of going over, this is how it's outlined. I think there are a lot of circumstances where, an adult child will, quote unquote, get their inheritance early. And for whatever reason that might be, I think it's always nice when the parents take the time to outline, we gave you XYZ for this reason, and that does come out of your inheritance. Ultimately, we see that as fair. You can have whatever feelings you want about it, but that's how we've got it set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's like, no, Mama meant for me to have that ring, and no, Mom and Dad said I could have that. It's like I've heard this many times in my life,
and oftentimes it's not even the most. There's really no monetary value. It's more the sentimental or the stories around it. That
I know when my grandmother passed, there was a necklace that was honestly like costume jewelry. It was probably $5. And I felt so strongly that I had the necklace because I remember being a little girl and playing dress up and wearing the necklace and loving it. So to your point,
right.
Oftentimes the things people care most about aren't even valuable.
Yeah. Right, from a financial perspective.
Yes, yeah, financially valuable.
But Bill, you do bring up a good point, and thank you for doing that, because while, Carrie and I and our colleagues are certified financial planners, certainly more than competent on the numbers side, even though we may not have personally had the conversation or experience, we certainly have had it many, many times throughout our careers. And so it is something where families have either asked, how do I start the conversation? We've had them say, all the kids are going to be in town over the holidays. Can we have a family meeting then? So I thank you for bringing that up, because that is something you may not think you would ask your financial planner to help you with or that they would participate in. We've seen oftentimes too, when you have a third party who's not a family member, not always, but people tend to be better behaved when there's someone outside the family there.
It's a good buffer.
True.
Yeah. True. And sometimes it's easier to hear it from that person than from mom and or dad.
And to hear that decision is not abnormal, that, we see this all the time.
Right.
I think normalizing lots of different decisions is something that we're in a unique position to do and to affirm.
No, I agree. I think communication does solve a lot of problems. It's just sometimes that communication needs a little help.
Definitely.
Especially around this topic. Around this topic.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of which, if anybody wants to communicate with you, Nicole, what's the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you and maybe have a conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Any of our listeners, they want to speak with me or Carrie or one of our other fabulous colleagues. Two ways. You can go to our website at myprivatevista.com. There's a contact us button on the homepage. Put in your information, reference this episode. One of us will reach out. Always happy to have a conversation. Or you can give us a call at 312-831-4370, and our receptionist can direct you to one of us.
Fantastic. The other thing you can do if you're listening to this podcast for the first time is reach out and hit the follow button. Become a subscriber. That way, the next time Nicole drops an episode of the podcast, you'll be notified and you can listen. But also, I ask that if you like this podcast, if you find it useful, valuable, entertaining, please tell people about it. Share it with other people. Word of mouth is a great promotional tool and always very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, and on behalf of Nicole and everybody at My Private Vista, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen today. And I want to remind you that you have a choice. You can go out today and make today a really good day or not. It is your choice, and it's up to you. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Dollars and Cents Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, sponsored by Private Vista. Visit our website at www.myprivatevista.com or give us a call at 312-831-4370. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Private Vista is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors LLC or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors LLC assume no liability for action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced. Such data and other information are subject to changes without notice. This was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors LLC or any of its affiliates.